local planning panel open. It's usual for us planning members to introduce ourselves so that you know who we are. I'm David Lloyd. I'm a lawyer. I'm a QC with a current practicing certificate. I'm a former judge of the Land and Environment Court. I'm a former acting judge of the Supreme Court. I'm currently a professor of law at Western Sydney University, and I chair 3 other planning panels.
My name's Chris Young. I'm a town planner and traffic engineer. I've had 40 years experience in planning, over 25 years in local government, and as director of a Department of Planning, and 19 years as a planning consultant, and I'm on other planning panel as well as Hunters Hill.
I'm Virginia Wise. I'm the community representative for Hunters Hill. And I'm 30-something years as an commercial interior designer.
Okay, I'm Ron Edgar. I'm an architect and heritage consultant. I've got 40-odd years experience. I'm also a local planning panel member for Blue Mountain City Council, and I also sit on panels for Cumberland Council and until recently Bankstown Council, and several other state and local government appointments.
All right, the next item is confirmation, next item is declaration of interests. There are no declarations of interest, of what I am aware. In relation to the first development application, number 10 Foss Street, Hunters Hill.
Mr. Chairman, before we do that,
yes.
I suggest we do the confirmation of this. Last week.
That's the order.
Okay.
Yeah. Declaration of interest comes first.
Okay. Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
In relation to the first matter, 10 Foss Street, Hunters Hill, that is owned by the council solicitor, Mr. John Cole. I should advise that as a lawyer, I worked for some time, a year and a half in fact, as a consultant at Mr. Cole's legal firm. That's just for information. It was some years ago, and I regard there's no conflict of interest in that situation. So, but there are no formal declarations of interest. So now we can move on to confirmation of minutes.
I'll move those, Mr. Chairman.
And they are correct and adopted as correct.
Yep.
So we can now move on to the first of the development applications we have to consider. The proposed alterations and additions at 10 Foss Street, Hunters Hill. The panel inspected this earlier in the afternoon. There are no objections to it. The only reason it is referred to the panel is because it's owned by one of the council's solicitors, and it was thought that it should be referred to this independent panel for consideration. Mr. Edgar wasn't there, but are you happy with it, Mr. Edgar?
I did actually go to the site. I was tailing you guys,
yeah.
And I'm very happy with it, actually. I think it's quite a good outcome.
It's, as I said, the only reason it's referred to us is because of the perceived conflict of interest. So that is approved.
Move the recommendation, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I've got a minor alteration to the recommendation, just to be legally correct. The recommendation reads that the local planning panel, I've inserted the words, exercising the functions of the council as the determining authority, has considered the development application, etc. So I insert those words. We also have to give our reasons for the decision, and I add reasons for decision as follows. The panel supports the findings contained in the assessment report and endorses the reasons for approval contained in that report. They are the panel's reasons in that case. So with that, I can move on to the other matter we have to consider. This is the proposed alterations and additions at 80 Alexandra Street, Hunters Hill. We have just come back from that address and looked at what is proposed. We also visited the adjoining property of Miss Wood, and looked at the proposal from her point of view. We have a number of people who wish to make submissions. We will hear objectors first and then the applicant. The first one we would like to hear from is Alexandra Bennett. Are you here, please? Please come forward.
Thank you.
We have read your written submission.
Thank you.
You have 3 minutes.
Yes, thanks very much for the opportunity to address the meeting. I really have a series of questions because I don't believe that they've been answered in the papers that I've seen so far. So I wondered whether there had been any consideration given, and if so, what, to the traffic engineering issues. As you'll note from my submissions, I have concern about the pedestrian and traffic hazard in that area, noting the very busy times when ferries arrive at the bottom. Unfortunately, you're just missing a very busy time. At 4:45, 4 o'clock is mayhem around our area, and a lot of cars park in that area. And there has been any response regarding traffic issues weren't responded to in the papers I saw. Also, there's a removal of a stormwater drain in Alexandra Street, and I didn't see any addressing of that issue in the papers. But you can imagine that as the water sweeps down Alexandra Street, that stormwater drain is very important. Otherwise, if there is none, it will continue to sweep down the rest of Alexandra Street. I also I don't understand how a deferred commencement approval can be given when issues outlined in Schedule 1 rely on non-council people's decisions and or their actions, or just the referral to a report being undertaken, not a decision being undertaken. It seems to me that if Mrs. Wood said no to the pruning of the tree, that would, as it stands, mean that the approval of the approval couldn't go through. Is that really what is meant by Schedule 1? And if so, is Mrs. Wood taking on some legal liability because of that? And then I also have concerns about the jacaranda tree that will be removed where the garage entrance exit will be. And finally, I have concerns with regard to conflict of interest. What assurance is there, given the applicant sits as a community member on this local planning panel, that the panel has been constituted to consider the application will do so in a manner that places no weight on this fact? What example does it set to Hunters Hill residents that a member of the local planning panel seeks exemptions from the planning rules? And wouldn't it be a better example if they actually were showing an example of compliance? And I believe that they could be compliant because it is a large block of land, and so there's no need to hug the western side. I don't actually believe that there's a need to build a large garage, but putting that to one side, that's the least of my issues. The lack of proper appropriate setbacks that comply with the rules is a major concern for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Wood. Ms. Wood?
I'm being represented by Mr. Kendall.
Where is Ms. Wood?
So I'm being represented by Dan Regan this afternoon.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Please, thank you.
Thank you.
Again, you're limited to 3 minutes.
Thank you.
And we did visit the property earlier this afternoon. Yes.
Good. Thank you for the opportunity to address the panel. I'd like to talk about two matters related to the impact of development on the adjoining property at 78 Alexandra. One is the impact of the extension to the rear on the rear yard number 78. I acknowledge that the officers are recommending a further 3 metre setback of the garage from Virette Street, and that is appreciated. It still results in a considerable amount of the rear yard of number 78 being adjoined by a 2-storey dwelling, potentially 1.5 metres from the boundary. We submit that in the circumstances of this case, that 1.5 metres, were the panel of a mind to approve the application, should be increased to 2.3 metres, which is the setback of the existing house. And the reason we say that in the circumstances is because we think that is a development that sits more comfortably with the objectives of the setback controls, being to respect the pattern of setbacks in the locality. Locality is characterised by houses set towards the front of each block, with the contiguous back gardens allowing a tree canopy to prevail in a mid-block context. Increasing the setback to 2.3 metres would make it consistent with the existing dwelling, would allow more meaningful screen planting on the subject site to buffer and soften the appearance of the 2-storey extension. It will provide further protection to the root zone of the important elm tree in the rear of that garden, and would reduce the impacts on the adjoining property, particularly midwinter morning sun, which will be lost in the early hours of the morning until the sun comes around. Concerning the tree, we submit that there is a miscalculation of the root zone in the arborist's report. I think the arborist report describes the root zone as having a diameter of 4.8, and in fact the diameter I think is 8.7. It's measured by the diameter of the tree at 1.4 metres, and we've checked that, and you multiply the diameter of the tree at 1.4 metres above ground level, multiply that by 12 to get the tree root zone. We support the recommendation in the notice, in the draft conditions of consent. We support the condition in the draft conditions of consent that the recommendation of the arborist's report be implemented. The arborist's report said that there will be no impact on the tree root zone of tree number 19, and we think that recommendation should be endorsed. To that effect, and if it's of any benefit to the panel, I've took the liberty of preparing some track changes to the conditions, which I'm more than happy to leave with you for your consideration in determining the conditions.
Thank you very much.
Of any consent you might give.
All right, thank you very much. And you should give a copy to Mr. Brindle or Mr. Boston for the applicant.
Yes,
Do you have a copy for them?
Yes,
Yeah.
I do. Two here.
Oh, sorry. Yes, it is. Yes. Sorry.
All right.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brindle. Yeah. Now I've got one. All right. For the applicant, we've got Dr. Shield and Mr. Boston. Who wishes to go first?
Thank you, panel. Meredith Shield. I thought I would just start by giving you a history. I know we've walked through it with most of the panel, however, not all the panel were able to be there. The proposal before you is for what has been my family home for a very long time, and it is in quite a rundown state and needs a lot of restoration work. And so the proposal before you is to really to set the house up for how our family needs for the next 30 or so years. We're very conscious. I love my house. We're very conscious of its prominent position on the corner, the impact that any renovations that we want to do will have on streetscape, from Alexandra Street, Kokira Street and Barrett Street. And we've also been very conscious of needing to improve the amenity along our boundary with the next door neighbour. So we have worked very closely with the Conservation Advisory Panel from the very beginning. We came in with concept plans and have been backwards and forwards a number of times to get the house plans to where they are now. The storage under the I understand that the plans can look quite stark, and it's really only when you come and you look at the site and you understand the siting of the house and the way the land falls that you can get a really good feel of what we're trying to do and how subtle we're trying to be. The tennis court element is designed so that there will actually not be any significant change to your site walking down Alexandra Street. At the moment there's a stone wall there which my parents put in when they built the tennis court that has planting above it, and we would be intending to the height that we're elevating the tennis court is kept to an absolute minimum, which is 650 mils, which actually raises it just to the height of the next door neighbour's, the land in the next door neighbour's yard. We are only excavating under it where there is already fill, so that minimises the amount of excavation. It's only the half of the court where it already slopes away and is built up. And that is not for any other reason mostly than storage of cars, trailers, motorbikes, surfboards, bikes, because we have a very large family of 4 children, all over 6 foot. I have a husband who also likes to collect motorbikes. So there will be no more traffic in and out of that entrance than occurs in and out of Kokira Street with all the comings and goings from our family as it is at the moment. I actually think that the exit coming out of there will be safer than coming out of Kokira Street. Kokira Street, a big part of what we're doing also is wanting to re-establish the frontage of the house into the portico at the front, and that's been built into the design, and also removing the ugly 70s element at the front corner of the house and replacing that with something more in keeping with the style of the house. We're restoring what was the original widow's walk there, so we'll be losing a bedroom space up there, and putting in a gabled section that's in keeping with the character of the original house. That's in the front section of the house. And then at the rear section at the moment, as you walk into Kokira Street, that element has lost any character and is really just a 70s flat roof, aluminium window structure. We have worked very closely with Council's DCP objectives on the rear extension, which is set lower than the main part of the house, is separated from it by an element, so that it has separation and is in forms in keeping with the character of the house, but is in a contemporary form, and is muted colours. So it's designed to sit quietly behind the house. The garaging at the back has been designed around what is an existing garage set 3 metres in and on the boundary that has been there since my parents bought the house in 1960s, so before that. It was a garage. They turned it into a surgery where my mother worked as a general practitioner for many years. It sits because it is on a road reserve, it sits well back from the actual road and well back from the footpath, and is behind garden area, so that it sits really quietly in there and has done for many years. The boundary wall is on the next door neighbour's yard, but has established growth on that, which I thought is a beautiful garden element actually, and would want to be retained. But I'm very conscious of wanting to retain the garage in that rear set quiet location. We've done everything to meet the DCP requirements there. The DCP does allow for, it's not breaching the DCP guidelines. The DCP guidelines allow for setback breaches for single-storey garages, and we have maintained it single-storey wherever it is not within the guidelines. The DCP allows garages to be within the boundary, so setback, so long as it doesn't take up more than 33%. We're not taking up more than 33%. And then the final area is the work that we have done on the boundary with the next door neighbour. We've been very conscious of the fact that that is a garden boundary. At the moment, the second story addition there is, in my opinion, an ugly fibro stucco building, the second story, with very large plate windows that look directly into the next door neighbour's backyard and give them no privacy whatsoever. We, with the new building, we are moving the bulk of the ridgeline away from the next door neighbour's house and replacing it with an enclosed veranda type section that is clad in soft timber, so it blends into the garden space and should sit very comfortably behind what is really a very dense screening. We also will be removing, although keeping the garage element, we will be removing a large section where the carport currently stands, which does go right to the boundary. So that will provide a long section of betterment along that boundary into 1.5 metres, where we will be putting screen planting, which will help further establish any screening of the new part of the building. And the rest of it, where we come out more than 1.5 metres, is also within the DCP criteria, requirements for articulation. And it's a very, very modest protrusion, upper floor only. The lower floor is actually within the 1.5 metres. There's a very large established screening there, so that it meets the DCP criteria for providing articulation and architectural merit without causing any issues of privacy, overshadowing, scanning, or any other matters. The other thing we've done is we've taken away all the big overlooking windows along that boundary and changed them to highlight windows to give their backyard back their privacy. So as I said, it's a big project for us, and we have put a lot of work into it. We have done our absolute best to meet every criteria of the DCP, the Council's heritage and conservation measures, and we are not happy with the proposed changes, but I'm going to leave my planner to speak to those.
Thank you. Mr. Boston?
Excuse me, Chair, I'm not familiar with the procedures here, but the applicant's allowed more than 3 minutes, are they?
Well, the panel really needs to have an understanding of what's proposed.
I understand that, but I was just asking.
I mean,
are applicants allowed more than 3 minutes?
I allowed the previous speakers to go beyond 3 minutes. They each spoke for about 5 minutes. And if the panel is to make an informed decision, it needs this information. It's what we call, it's what we lawyers call one of the principles of procedural fairness, which we have to apply. And I invite Mr. Boston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Greg Boston, consultant planner for the applicant.
And you can assume that we were taken on a tour of the house with Dr. Shield, and she explained virtually what she has just now explained to us on site.
Fantastic. That'll save me some time, I'm sure. So I appreciate that. I do have something to table, if that's okay. I've got copies of it. It's simply going towards just the deferred commencement conditions. We have no issue at all with the operational conditions within the consent, including the condition going towards compliant with the arborist report. But there are a number of the deferred commencement conditions that I'd want to speak specifically to. There's a few suggested changes in terms of the wording, so I just wanted to table that and some extracts of the DCP, if that's okay. Just pass down one of them, might give assistance. Look, I'll start just briefly in terms of touching on just a couple of the issues raised by the neighbour, and that'll flow into the conditions that I want you to put your mind to. In terms of the stormwater culvert, that is being retained, it's not being removed. The driveway can be located in that position without removing the stormwater culvert, so that will not be an issue. In terms of the additional arboreal condition as suggested by BBC planners, look, we'd object to that on the basis that the operational conditions already deal with compliance with the arborist report. We believe that's the appropriate location in the consent for such a condition, and we raise no objection to the condition as put by council. With regards to deferred commencement condition number 1, it does put the emphasis on us to get consent from the neighbour to carry out pruning. The proposed conditional change that I'm suggesting there is that on the basis that the pruning works are anticipated through the granting of consent to the application, and on the basis that any pruning works will be located wholly on or within the subject property, I simply propose to require a condition that any required tree pruning be carried out pursuant to this consent shall be in strict accordance with clause 235E within part 2 of the Hunters Hill DCP, and I've attached a copy of that, an extract. And what that says is that in terms of building clearance works generally, that any reduction pruning to be in accordance with the Australian standard, and it sets a limitation in terms of the diameter of the branches which can be pruned when measured at the collar. So we raise no objection to those requirements, and of course the condition goes on to say that any pruning works will be wholly within the boundary of the subject property. We'll be comfortable with that condition as proposed. In terms of, subject to it being put in as an operational condition, not a deferred commencement condition. So that just drops down into the body of the consent, and that is requested in that draft condition. In terms of the street tree removal, the application's been in just over a year now with council. The condition seems to suggest that no one's put their mind towards the removal of the jacaranda tree. I would say that after 12 months, I'm sure that if that was an issue, a fundamental issue, it would have been raised. It certainly hasn't been articulated to the applicant. I propose an alternate condition there which requires us to liaise with Council's Parks and Landscape Coordinator to the extent necessary as to determine whether a replacement tree needs to go into that road reserve. And if a replacement tree does need to go in, then we give you a revised landscape plan nominating that replacement tree. We believe that that is the appropriate way to deal with that, and we'd be happy with a modified condition. Conditions 3 and 4 collectively go towards requiring the garage component, which occupies generally a footprint of the existing garage on that tertiary frontage, to be pulled in from the side boundary and be pulled off what's identified by council as a rear boundary, requiring a 6 metre setback. Whether it's a rear boundary or a tertiary front boundary, I think when you have a look at the streetscape broadly, there's certainly car parking structures right up to the boundary. What this proposal does is it keeps a 3 metre setback, 6 metre setback to all the 2-storey elements, such that the only non-compliant element is a single-storey garage to within 3 metres of the boundary, and then extending to the existing side boundary nil setback. Now, I've given you an extract of the DCP provision as it relates to rear boundary setbacks, And what it says is that for rear boundary setbacks, single-storey garage structures can extend up to the boundary, provided they don't occupy more than 1/3 of the boundary width. We certainly comply with that. In fact, we still maintain that 3 metre setback. And in terms of the side boundary setbacks, it also says that single-storey garage structures may extend within the required setback area. And on the basis that we are maintaining the established nil setback in that location, it is a single-storey element, we don't believe that there's any real justification for requiring that setback. I take you very briefly to the assessment report where you can garner some understanding as to why these conditions may well have been imposed. Page 24 and 25 of the agenda. And it simply talks about that the setbacks to the garage are not deemed acceptable due to the generous size of the subject site and its long-term effects on the adjoining residents at number 78 Alexandra Street and also the owners of the subject property. I'm not sure what the impact could be in terms of the proposed setbacks on my client, but I'm assuming that that's some sort of typo. It then talks about not having a setback as required will create problems of inadequate separation between neighbouring properties. The report, when you turn the page, it actually identifies that there's no solar access, privacy or view impacts. And then the final sentence, the third paragraph at the top, says, in view of the large size of the lot, it is considered the setback non-compliances should not be required or supported because it will set an undesirable precedent. I've given you an aerial photograph which shows that this is quite a unique site. It's got 3 frontages and the small area of non-compliance is pretty much contained to one corner of the subject property. What you get in terms of streetscape benefits and benefits from a heritage conservation perspective are significantly greater setbacks to the other 2 street frontages than what would be anticipated by the control, and certainly greater setbacks to the Verrett Street frontage as well. So in terms of saying, well, you can relocate these building elements elsewhere on the site to comply, we say that the setbacks proposed are an appropriate response not only to the existing built form circumstance, but the heritage considerations in terms of the site, and they've been endorsed twice now by the heritage officer. So that leaves the last condition, which so that was conditions 3 and 4, which we respectively asked that they do be deleted. As you know, the Act requires some flexibility in terms of applying the DCP provisions. We don't even rely on that because the variations that we are requesting in terms of the garage setbacks and the side boundary setbacks are variation provisions within the DCP control itself. So we're not even falling foul of the DCP provision when we ask for the setbacks. I won't take too much more time. The last condition goes towards requiring the bedroom intrusion into the setback, which is a 250mm intrusion, to be reduced on site. Now, what that 250mm setback allows significantly is the provision of a highlight window to the western boundary where there could be potential overlooking to the neighbour. There's a dense landscape screen there, so we believe it's probably not an issue. But importantly, what it does is it allows a south-facing window at 90 degrees to the boundary to be introduced to that bedroom such that there isn't a privacy issue. Now, if you go to the variation provisions in the DCP for site setbacks, it talks about minor encroachments being permissible provided greater area of the building is set back beyond the 1.5 metre control. And when you have a look at that elevation in its entirety, substantially greater areas of the building are set back well beyond the 1.5. The second arm of that control says that it's desirable to provide some articulation to enable 90-degree facing windows inside elevations, which is exactly what that minor 250mm variation allows us to achieve. So we certainly ask you to put your mind to that. Now finally, if you're not with me and you would want to impose the conditions because it's effectively a new structure or a structure relying on an existing setback to the boundary, I do have some revised plans here which I will table. What that would do is keep that existing surgery building in situ, not change it at all, simply work around it. All the proposed works would then be back to 6 metres from that rear boundary or the tertiary street frontage. And of course, there'd be compliance in terms of the side boundary setback to all the new works. Certainly not our preferred position in terms of an outcome. So we'd certainly ask you to put your mind towards the plans that form part of the bundle before you, but if you're not listening, we would certainly ask that you consider that as an alternate. We do have, there's 2 copies there, and we can provide some additional copies if that would assist the panel. Thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions.
That's your concern.
What's he done here?
That's the upstairs.
That's the upstairs.
Down the bottom there.
But he's brought his wall back.
Yeah, you've still got
A brick.
yeah.
Just at a minor variation.
That's still sticking out.
Yeah. It's just to give a bit of interest, I think.
Yeah.
That's
That takes you down to a single car garage.
Yeah. Does the panel have any questions before we release you? All right.
No, I don't.
No questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
What we are going to do is we need to consider this carefully. Rather than you sit around watching us mutter amongst ourselves, I think we'll just go out into another room and go over through these plans and come back and then let you know what happens to these. So we'll take a shorter view and deal with these issues. Right, I can tell you that the panel has carefully considered what's been put to us, and we have come to a determination which is unanimous. And I'll try and explain as simply as possible what we have decided. Firstly, as to the submissions of Ms. Bennett, is she still here? She raised the loss of parking in the street. We note that there will be the loss of one curbside space, which we think will be relatively marginal in the circumstances. She referred to the removal of the stormwater drain. We have been told by Mr. Boston, for the applicant, that the stormwater culvert is to remain. She raised, this is out of order, the question of a conflict of interest. I can say that we are an independent panel. Dr. Shield is a community representative who has sat on this panel once before, and community representatives are rotated, so she will probably not sit on the panel for a few more months. We, as an independent panel, are able to determine the matter exercising our own independent judgment and expertise. There is no conflict of interest. Next is that Ms. Bennett referred to some of the conditions in Schedule 1, and I will come back to those presently. We have, of course, taken on board what Mr. Brindle has said on behalf of Ms. Wood, and we visited Ms. Wood's property. We note that at the present time, the existing development presents an unsatisfactory aspect to the adjoining property at number 78. On the unsympathetic addition at the rear, there are upper story bedrooms with large windows that look directly into the yard of number 78 Alexandra Street. That is all to be removed and replaced with a new addition with highlight windows which will afford no overlooking into that yard. The concern was expressed about the privacy screen at the western edge of the new balcony of the upper story addition. We will require that privacy screen to extend the full length of the western edge of that balcony. The other main concern raised by Ms. Wood was loss of sunlight. We have looked at the shadow diagrams, and we are satisfied again that the loss of sunlight will only be on the worst day of the year, at midwinter, and only in the early morning, and the impact will therefore be marginal at most. That backyard will be bathed in sunlight for the majority of the day. So that doesn't concern us. We are also looked at the question of setbacks. We think that the existing garage structure facing Barrett Street, being an existing structure, can remain where it is. It's been there for umpteen years. It is not out of character with what's happening in Barrett Street. We noticed a garage directly opposite being built right on the street frontage, and there are other garages in the street right on the street frontage. We do not require that building to be set back either from the front or from the side. As to side boundary setbacks, the building is compliant except for a small portion of the proposed upper floor, which is projected forward slightly to give relief to that elevation. So you can take from what I have said that the panel is of the view that this project can proceed as designed. We think it is a well-designed project a lot of thought has gone into it, and I personally would like to compliment the architect on what has been a very good job, which has taken into account the impact on the neighbours. We do not require this to be a deferred commencement. This can be a straight-out consent. So we are going to change the recommendation and change a few of the conditions in Schedule 1. Looking at Schedule 1, Clause 1, or Paragraph 1, we prefer the alternative wording suggested here by the applicant's planner, namely, any required tree pruning works carried out pursuant to this consent shall be in strict accordance with Clause 2.3.5e within Part 2 of Hunters Hill Consolidated DCP 213 and limited to tree canopy located wholly within the boundary of the subject property. A concern was expressed during submissions about the drip zone and the tree root zone. We note that the whole of the other side of the fence opposite, on the subject property opposite the tree, has been concreted, and it doesn't seem to have affected the tree at all. In relation to the street tree removal, again, we prefer the alternative condition suggested by Mr. Boston, which I will read. The applicant is to liaise with Council's Parks and Landscape Coordinator regarding any required tree replacement tree planting to compensate for the removal of the Jacaranda mimosifolia tree 2 from within the road reserve. Any required compensatory tree planting shall be nominated on an amended landscape plan and endorsed by Council. We have deleted from Schedule 1 conditions 3 and 4, which relate to the relocation of the existing garage. Condition 5 will be a general condition of consent. That relates to the heritage conservation works for the sandstone fence. And we delete condition 6. The submitted plans are those that will be approved. So the recommendation is that the local planning authority, exercising the functions of the council as the determining authority, resolves that development application number 2018-1015 for the construction of alterations and additions to the existing dwelling, new parking facilities and stone fence work be granted consent, not deferred commencement consent, pursuant to section 4.16 of the Environmental Planning Assessment Act in respect of number 80 Alexandra Street, Hunters Hill, with the following amended conditions. One of the amended conditions that I have not mentioned and will be specifically applied is that the privacy screen on the western end of the proposed balcony be extended to the full western edge of that balcony. Does the panel have any other things that you wish to say? No. So with that, we think that this is a well-designed proposal. It takes full account of the impact on the adjoining property and the tree, and we think that it is a good development and is approved. So with that, I can formally close the meeting. Thank you for your attendance.